doorbell at Jimmy's house. Now, when you come to my house, my doorbell sounds like this.
Hey, welcome to the People's Weekly on People's Radio United. I'm Tim, and I'm here with everybody today. We have Canadian Glenn, Nolan Hack, and Jen Deerenwater. How is everybody doing?
Acceptable.
I'm going to go with that answer. I'm going to piggyback off of that answer. Acceptable.
I will be ecstatic once we're done with this and my week is officially over.
Well, let's hurry up then.
5-minute show, everybody. Let's figure this out.
Yeah, no tangents. I said it 3 times.
No Pepsi. Coke, no Pepsi.
Cheeseburger.
There you go. Somebody got it.
So, yeah, No View Up Here's happening next week, correct, Glenn?
That is correct.
So there's nothing to talk about. Oh, you have a wrestling show tomorrow. For wrestling fans.
Yeah, but, everybody who listens to that already knows, so no big deal.
Okay, cool. Yeah,
I will add one thing. Today's show is brought to you by Mataro Blue.
Nice. I'm still on the Girl Scout cookies.
Fair enough.
So yeah. What else? Oh, I think we mentioned it last week. The next Music to Riot 2, Rage Against the Enemy is out now.
Yes.
And there's another one coming soon. So keep an eye out for that, and then we can get started if I could find it. Does anyone have the first topic already? I'm looking for it.
We got Ilhan Omar and the continual oppression of Palestinians in the Middle East.
Okay, yeah.
That's actually. I could read the whole thing. I'll read the whole thing. The U.S. has for a long time adopted an unofficial policy of giving support to the fascist state of Israel, which should be called Palestine, is Palestinian land. This seems to be getting more blatant in the last 2 years. There are bills being introduced that make it mandatory to pledge allegiance to Israel in order to maintain certain jobs, and support for a free Palestine is becoming viewed more and more as anti-Semitic. Now, when you hear that the Pledge of Allegiance thing, that reminds me of Nazi Germany when they had the kids, and America, to be honest with you, when they had the kids say Heil Hitler and do the Nazi salute and that whole thing. And the United States would make the kids sing the Pledge of Allegiance. I had to go through that song and dance when I was a youngin'. So, oppressive states be oppressive states.
Yeah, but they're telling people to sign a Pledge of Allegiance to a whole other country. It's not. I mean, the Pledge of Allegiance to anything is sick, but I mean, they're saying if you want to keep your job or you have to. That's what these bills are saying. They have to pledge allegiance to a foreign nation. That they won't badmouth them publicly or anything.
It's a lot of it is based in Judeo-Christian, white Christian doctrine. The whole, that land is the lands of the Jewish people. The Jewish people are the chosen people. So saying that and believing that cancels out any form of logic or reason. Logic and reason being, that land was originally Palestinian land, and over the last about 8 decades, they have been squeezed into a very small section of that land, and now that whole place is controlled by Israel, which is a colony.
Occupied Palestine.
Yeah. It's so... Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm just looking at what's written for us for the topic, there's mention of it getting more blatant in the last 2 years. Well, gee, what a coincidence. What happened in 2016 and 2017. But, I think it's pretty clear that there's absolutely no brakes on any of the well-worn, same old games that go on in D.C. This is open season for everybody because the biggest crook has the biggest pen. So, as far as these anti-BDS bills coming up in state legislatures, again, this is all through ALEC, they write the laws in one place and then email them to every state capital. We know that. It just proves that government is for sale in the United States. I think that's what it proves, number one. And for some reason, that seems to be the last factor any of the corporate media wants to talk about. But money is more important than votes, apparently. And this is an abuse of state power by taking a political position and using the force of the state to make it go over. I hear about free enterprise, free markets. Well, if you're going to withhold a government contract because whoever owns the contractor won't pose for a picture with Bibi, somehow I don't see that as being a free market. But, like everything else in the U.S., this is what we say it is. So just never mind what it really is. I don't know. Of course, this is on paper unconstitutional, but what the hell ain't these days in the U.S.? I don't see it ending. Like just said at the very start, Nolan said House Representative Omar is the one being flogged publicly at the moment for bringing it up. My God, how dare you? Of course, it doesn't help considering Ms. Omar's personal appearance. You know what? I'll just put a tangent on my tangent. When I look at her and she's a member of the House of Representatives, I smile. I think, wow, look at this. Maybe the United States is going to enter the 21st century. Hang on, we'll have to see. But maybe, because up here in Canada, like our Minister of Immigration is an immigrant from Somalia.
Which would make sense.
But, I just don't see anything of that magnitude taking place in the United States for another generation? Maybe more, which is strange, but,
And let's not forget that Ms. Omar was absolutely correct.
Yes.
About what she said about AIPAC and how the pro-Israel lobbyists have the Democrats in Congress in their pocket. But then she proved that, like everybody else in Congress, she's a sellout by apologizing for telling the truth, which further takes away from the point at hand that we have innocent people over in Palestine being abused, killed, imprisoned just because they're Palestinian, just because the land is being taken away by the state of Israel and their allies. And speaking of allies, Omar's ally, Rashida Tlaib, if I pronounce the last name correctly, another sellout. And the sick thing about Rashida, she's Palestinian. She took money from J Street, which is one of the biggest Zionist lobbyists in Washington. She has taken money from other people in Congress's campaigns who are Zionists. This is a just another example of, well, here they are, another congressperson. We hope, and they fail us again. And at least on the surface, the representation Glenn spoke of, that's good, at least from the standpoint of, well, it's not another white man in office. And it is a Muslim woman. It is a black woman. It is an immigrant from Somalia. But like the last president, who's from Kenya, from the motherland, she's still a Washington politician. She still is against us. She can say all these different things. She's, for goodness sake, this shows you just the giant distraction that Washington causes. She comes out and goes, AIPAC is ridiculous and is just giving money to all these Democrats. And then she gets all this BS hate, racist hate, because, oh no, she's an anti-Semite. Well, no, she's not. She's just telling the truth about Palestine. And then she revokes her apology. The woman spoke at a white supremacist rally, Miss Hillary Rodham Clinton. Omar's a punk. I mean, I'm not going to mince words. But of course, they all are. But this is what's getting lost within this. I mean, just today, Friday, the 15th of February, you've got the Israeli officials, Israeli Border Patrol, firing and shooting at Palestinian protesters. According to Israeli officials themselves, there have been 11,000 Palestinians protesting, and they're shooting some live fire. They're shooting rubber bullets, according to the Palestinian Red Crescent. 109 protesters have been wounded. Thankfully, I haven't heard anybody being killed, but that sadly happens every day over there.
Maybe they need a wall.
Well, that it all comes full circle. White supremacy does so, and it's right at the Gaza border. Speaking of need, if you're a bigot who advocates for a wall, I'm sure Israel would love to build a wall, a giant wall on the Gaza border.
They have a big giant wall
already in the West Bank.
That's why I was being sarcastic.
Well, so what's the same thing in the United States. There's a wall on parts of the border, the southern border, but build a giant wall from one side to the other. Finish the wall, right?
No, I think this just proves that politics are far more important than innocent lives. Because in Israel right now, there is an election coming. There is a probable criminal indictment against the sitting prime minister and his wife for being dirty with money. That is pretty much guaranteed to be coming as well, but not till after the election. So, when you have a fascist as the incumbent, what better way to rile up your supporters than demonstrate some fascism before it's time to go vote? And in the Western world, nobody's going to report on the escalation from Israel because that's okay, according to how things run. And of course, that's not related to AIPAC and all its money at all. Oh, no. But as far as Nolan, I understand your point with they turn around and sell out. But, I know you don't like to hear this, but again, I'm going to say it. Hate the game, not the player. They are as rookie can get on the Hill. And look what they've already had the balls to come out and say. There are people that go there for 15 years and don't have the fucking guts to say that.
Sure.
So,
well, Obama.
Go ahead. I'm going to jump in now. So, one, fuck the idea of saying somebody has balls. That's just really sexist and just messed up. That's giving this idea of power to male physiology, and that's not cool. But
I should have said chutzpah.
I'll accept that.
All right.
And so I'm going to bring it back to the Congresswoman's original tweet about how AIPAC, it all comes down to money. And like, I absolutely understand there is this, sort of anti-Semitic trope of, the wealthy Jews taking over the world and such. But the reality is AIPAC does get money to U.S. politicians. I mean, they have like a $3 million lobbying budget. And while they are not legally allowed to directly give money to politicians, they hold fundraisers and do all kinds of things to get pro-Israel individual donors to get money to these politicians. I mean, like Chuck Schumer is one of the politicians who's taken the most money that's like come his way through AIPAC. So it is a lot of it has to do with money. She was hitting the nail on the head, and I wish she had just stuck to it. And instead of saying, oh, I'm sorry, what I said was anti-Semitic, if she just came back and said, no, here's the reality of the state of Israel and AIPAC and the money that's involved in these U.S. campaigns. Like, she just should have done that. But, she had people in her own party coming at her, ripping her to shreds, like Nancy Pelosi. So honestly, I'm not surprised that she backpedaled. I'm sad that she did, but I'm not all that surprised. But, something that like I don't hear a lot of people talk about that really bothers me is that, why is the U.S. so involved in Israel, and why do we let Israel be so involved in our affairs? Israel is the only foreign nation that the U.S. government allows to come in and dictate a lot of our policy. I mean, here in D.C., if a foreign country sends like a representative over here, they have to register under the Foreign Agents Act, and they're not allowed to take part in anything that has to do with U.S. politics. And yet Israel doesn't, and the representatives for Israel don't have to do that. They're all excluded from that. And that's wild to me. Like, we don't let other countries come in and do this. We have people all up in arms over the idea of Russia having been involved in our election. So why aren't we bothered by Israel being involved in our, in our system and the things that we do? Like, regardless of where you stand on Palestine, which I think most people know, I'm very pro-Palestine and fuck Israel. But like, I just, on that level alone, like, I don't even get that. That's so wild to me.
A lot of it, well, the basis for it is Judeo-Christian ideology. It's the land of the Jewish people. The Jewish people are the chosen people. So that's where they should be. That's where Jesus is going to come back. If you're a Christian or if you're a Jewish person, this is the Holy Land. This is our land. Throwing again rhyme and reason out the door. Palestinians were there first. They got it taken from them very violently, and still are to this day, to this very second. And back to Omar, this is a woman who spoke at a white supremacist rally. Hillary Clinton. Fuck her. Okay. Yes. She said the right. I mean, how Obama has said some very, quote unquote, inspiring words here and there. He was still absolutely horrendous when he was a senator and when he was president. How many great words have you heard from people like Winston Churchill, FDR, Abraham Lincoln, some horrendous, horrible human beings? This is from Omar's own mouth. Thank you for the love, Hillary Clinton. Women like you have paved the way for all of us to come this far. The fuck are you talking about?
Well, I would say on a pure statistical level, if Hillary had not gone through the nomination and the campaign, do you think a Muslim woman had the same probability of getting elected to the House than if Hillary wasn't the nominee last time around?
Probably not. That does not absolve her from. I mean, it's the same as going to Trump rally. I mean, we're still talking about a white supremacist. We're still talking about a woman who has unleashed terror all over the world in spades and just done some of the most horrible things known to humankind. And the core, I mean, again, the core issue, we're getting distracted. There's always these types of distractions. Trump and speaking of walls and borders, Trump going, Mexicans are bringing the worst rapists, the criminals, and yet, wait, whose land is this again? And Mexico used to stretch up to Utah. Why are we talking about a border? How about we stop oppressing these indigenous people, these native people, and let them migrate where they wish, especially since the United States is toppling governments and making it harder for those people to live in their own countries. And how many Palestinian immigrants do you see across the world? Because Palestine is such a difficult and oppressive place to live for them. And again, the distraction, yes, representation is important in a lot of factions of white society to try to topple white society, but you can't do that within the system in this government. Even though it's nice to see, and I'm tired of seeing white men, I'm tired of seeing white women, but yes, she's Muslim, she's black, and that's about it. That is about it. It's the same with Deb Haaland and Cerise Davis and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Barack Obama, John Lewis, you name it. Yeah, well, there you go. They're people of color. They're black. They're native. They're Japanese. They're the Arab, what have you. But that's where it stops. This is it's sad. I mean, I would love to support Miss Omar, and if she actually, if it was possible for a decent person to enter Congress and then actually get some things done. But I'd love to support her and hope that she was pushing for change and pushing for freedom. But again, she's a Democrat. You can't be a Democrat, especially on the national stage, and push for change and really be about helping people and helping oppressed people,
You can, just like Bernie Sanders, you can say a lot of good stuff while you vote for terrible stuff and just go along with it and promote it because that's just the way it is. So, politicians can always say good things. It's just they don't back it up. I think that's the problem.
There's a council member, I can't remember what nation he's from. So he is also Slagi, but his family also is Alaskan Native, and he's a council member up there. And he put out this tweet a few days ago that I loved. It said, Democrats trick smart people and Republicans trick stupid people. Exactly. And I really liked that. I was like, yes, that is exactly it. And as somebody who, for most of my life, I was really drinking that Democratic Kool-Aid until I started working for them. It's true. They do. They're so good at saying a lot of the right things, and you buy into it. And, even when Hillary was running, by no means did I think that Hillary represented me, but there was also still this feeling in me as somebody who at the time was still thinking of running of wow, people like her, even though I don't really like her, she is making it easier for someone like me to come along one day and run for office. And now I look at it and I'm like, yeah, that's not entirely true. But it's easy to get swept up in that. I was at this Natives and Politics event here in DC on Monday evening, and I mean they had Highland and Sharice Davids and I can't think of her name. She's the lieutenant governor for Minnesota, and she's Ojibwe, I think. Can't remember her name, but they had them all there, and it's so easy to get caught up in that and be like, yes, I finally see my people. I finally see, whatever community you're a part of being represented. But ultimately, there's really no way to be in office and do good things for your people, and if you do something good, you're going to have to turn around and do two things that are really horrible that just basically wipes away any good you did. Yeah.
Peggy Flanagan, I believe.
That's it. Yes, Peggy Flanagan. Thank you.
She defended Liz Warren's DNA test, if I'm not mistaken. I know Howland did.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about that because we all said we weren't going to go on tangents. And if you really want to hear me get like angry, get me talking about that.
Nolan throws those little tangent fishing poles out and tries to
Yes,
catch
he
it.
does.
I'm just giving information to
It's so
people.
hard
That's
not
all.
to take the bait.
I'm just a purveyor of information. That's all I am.
Oh, wow.
But you hit the nail on the head, Jen. You hit the nail on the head. You cannot enter that form of Washington politics and have a soul. Someone like, I consider everybody on the show to be good people, truly fighting for change. If we actually, any of us, actually wanted to run for office and try to win and hold our morals and not lose sight of them, there's no chance in hell we'd win. No chance in that. We could be a senator, a congressperson, or president. No way. Absolutely not. You can name any congressman or congresswoman you want. They're an asshole. Name them. Doesn't make a difference. And I wish that wasn't the case. I wish every time I didn't see, AOC, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, Kristen Sinema, any of them, I didn't get filled with rage because I know what they represent. I know what they do. Even if I haven't heard of them before or I don't know much about them, I know the second I check them out, I'm going to find a bunch of ugly dirt. It's the same every single time. People say there's exceptions to the rule. There are no exceptions to this rule. There's no wiggle room. There's none whatsoever.
I think part of the problem there is that, I have met some people who I think they genuinely went into politics because they wanted to do something good. I think there are those people. They genuinely went in with good intentions. But if for no other reason, the exorbitant cost of running a campaign puts so much pressure on you as an individual, as a person, your values, your morals, and then the values and morals that you're professing to bring into elected office. Like, how the hell do you run a campaign without money? And the answer is that you can't. And anytime you have to start taking donations, you have to start thinking about, like, now what do I owe these people? What do I owe this corporation? What do I owe this lobbying group? Because that's the reality. You're not just beholden to the voters or your constituents. Like, you're beholden to the people who gave you money. And I mean, these campaigns, once you hit the federal level, these campaigns can cost $1 million+ dollars. That's just for like Congress. There's just no way to do it without taking some kind of like dirty money.
Omar got over $1 million for her run to Congress in Minnesota to prove your point.
Yeah.
She got her opponent, Jennifer Stilinski, got $23,000. So, and I'm never going to support a Republican like I once supported a Democrat, but that's unfair. That you see, usually a lot of times you see the reverse effect. The Republicans are getting the money, but geez, $1 million to $20,000. How the hell is Jennifer supposed to have a chance?
You don't. That's the reality. You just don't.
Something else I think more Americans need to be aware of, the way campaign financing laws work. Say you're a good person and you won $20 million in the lottery. You can't turn around and take, if you're running for a seat in California, you can't take $5 million of your own dollars and spend it on your campaign. You can't do that. That's way too much. Even if you're benevolent and you fall into money, you can't use your own money. It's the way it's set up, man.
That's one reason why you see, Trump a lot of people would come out with, well, he's got all this money, so he could just spend all he wants on the campaign. But like you said, you can't do that.
No.
Yeah, you can't. If I remember correctly, Bernie and Hillary, I'll double check this after I say it. I should probably do it in reverse, but I think Bernie and Hillary took more Zionist money than Trump did for the election, the 2016 election.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, both parties are big supporters of occupied Palestine. There might be some members, like we said, that talk big talk, but they don't back it up with their voting generally. And even if they do, they know they're outnumbered, so nothing will happen. So they can still look good, while getting the job done for their donors and backers. But people need to realize this whole anti-Semitism thing is ridiculous. There's real anti-Semitism. People are attacking synagogues and spray painting terrible things on them and beating people up for being Jewish or whatever. But saying you want to boycott, divest, and sanction a country for the treatment, or an occupation for the treatment of a country that is occupying and the citizens of that country is not in any way anti-Semitic. I mean, just look, there's big protest with actual Jewish cats out there protesting Israel and their treatment of Palestine. I mean, like Hasidic Jews, out there. I don't think they're anti-Semitic. I think they're just people who care about other human beings. And just like the U.S. uses Christianity to control its fascists, Israel uses Judaism to control its fascists.
It's Jewish extremism. It's the same as Christian extremism.
Exactly.
White extremism, even Muslim, Islam extremism. And the real sick thing about the creation of Israel, the only genocide, I said this 400 times, I'll say it for the 401st, the only genocide white society recognizes as a genocide is the Holocaust. That happens, one of the worst things that ever happened. 6 million Jewish people killed. Horrible. There's no other opinion there. It was horrible. And then the UN comes about 2 years later, and they say, well, these are the definitions of genocide. And then we're also going to give Jewish people a free country. Well, it's the 20th century, so everybody is on their section of the planet. You got societies all over the world, of every continent. How are you gonna give them a free country? We don't really like Muslims too much and the Arab people. Let's just hit that land right there, and the Holy Land, right? So let's give them that, and who cares who's living there? And that came out after the Holocaust. The Holocaust is one reason why Palestine started to get occupied, and that's just the worst form of irony. You have one genocide turn into another, and the victims of the first genocide are the oppressors of the second and still current genocide of Palestinians. They're using the same tactics in certain aspects as the Nazis did against themselves, that they had inflicted on themselves during the Holocaust. It's just, that's racism for you. That's white supremacy for you. It doesn't make any sense. Why would you do this after, everyone talks, when they talk about the Holocaust, it's like, never forget, never forget, never forget. We shouldn't. We should not forget. Yet we have Jewish people, Jewish extremists, just having amnesia. Let's do the same things that was done to us to somebody else, and just take their land and just be happy. Who cares?
Well, let's not forget that the impetus for the British deciding to give up land that was under their colonial control was brought about by terrorists in Palestine, many of which went on to become Prime Minister of Israel. But Ergun, Stern Gang, the King David hotel bombing, that's what really moved everything. And those were acts of terror. And they got a country out of it and global protection out of it. So, that's something that, maybe less than 1% of Americans are aware of. And why? Because look at South Africa. Boycott was what changed things. And first the Commonwealth did it. We kicked them out of the Commonwealth. And then when the Americans came on board, then there was a snowball going down a hill. It happened in the Balkans. When they didn't play ball, they came around. You know, but Israel? Oh, no. Can't do that.
So I just looked this up on using personal funds for campaigns. So the FEC says that when candidates use their personal funds for campaign purposes, they are making contributions to their campaigns. Unlike other contributions, these candidate contributions are not subject to any limits. They must, however, be reported. Yeah, so I wanted to throw that out there. And yeah, you know, as somebody who grew up in, you know, very conservative Bible Belt, rural Oklahoma and Texas, you know, I grew up hearing a lot of really anti-Semitic things being said by right-wing Christians. And then, you know, as I got older, became more politically aware, have more awareness in the world, I couldn't understand. I was like, so the same kind of Christians I grew up hearing these really awful anti-Semitic things are the same ones that are pro-Israel. Like, what exactly is it that America is trying to get out of this? Like, there's got to be something there. Because let's be real, America doesn't really give a rat's ass about Jewish people. It never has. Like, we didn't enter World War II to save Jewish people from the Holocaust. We only went in because we got bombed. Like, I've never understood this. You know, and I went on this really long road trip a while back, and I was driving through, I think I was in Georgia at this point, and I saw this, like, huge billboard that said, I can't remember exactly what it said, but it was basically saying, oh, you know, we need to support Israel because Israel is keeping the Christians in the Middle East safe. It was just, what the hell is that? I was out in the middle of nowhere, too, and suddenly here's this big billboard about Israel. Like, I don't understand. It's like, what exactly is it that America is getting out of Israel? Because, I mean, let's be real. It's not about taking care of Jewish people. That's not what it is. It's something completely different.
Yeah, I think some of these people are like super Christians that are running, you know, and they always have been, the people like in Congress or whatever. So they wanna protect Israel because their religion depends on it to bring on the end of the world.
Well, part of that, you know, the why is to, especially nowadays, like just said earlier in the program. It seems like the Zionism has kicked up the last number of years, especially in politics, the United States. But part of that is because it's trying to keep Muslims and Arabs down a couple pegs, because that part of the world is mostly Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a fortress there in Israel, the United States, and you're telling your entire citizens here in the United States, oh, you know, Islam's bad. You got to watch out for these Muslims. And then you have a Jewish state, and if you know your Bible, you know, was it like 70, 80% of the people in the United States identify as Christians, or the people who do identify as Christians. People who have a religion identify as Christians. Excuse me. So they, you know your Bible. Jesus was a Jewish person. You know, you believe in the grand scheme of things, whether you believe Jesus was Christ or not, he was a Jewish person. So, okay. So Israel, let's support them. We need to support them, and they're going to stop. They're going to help stop, you know, Iran and Saudi Arabia, all these evil doers, like George W. Bush said. So it's a nice little fortress for the United States in the Middle East.
You know, I kind of wonder if it's partially because of like the oil and the gas and everything. If it's like, well, if we, you know, just, it's like what the U.S. government's always doing. It's trying to get its hands on some kind of money, which in this case is, you know, dead, dirty minerals. that, are so prolific in the Middle East. And I wonder if that's why. Like, it was like, well, let's try to get a stable government in there that we can tolerate. And hey, here's some oil and gas money and stuff that we can try to get. But then, like, just to that comment of, the Israel issue, like, going further and further to the right. I mean, AIPAC has gone further and further to the right. And, what I see when I'm just sitting here watching this, I'm like, I see Israelis doing horrible things to Palestinians, and then Palestinians and Muslim folks, as they should, in my opinion, then defend themselves. And then Israel comes back. It's just this back and forth. Like, it's never going to stop, it feels like.
Well, I think there's a long time ago, probably about, let me think now, 30 years ago, Seymour Hersh wrote a book called The Samson Option. And I think the reason that the relationship between the U.S. and Israel is what it is, in a geopolitical sense, is because when push comes to shove, the United States knows there's 60 or more nuclear weapons right in the middle of the Middle East that are on their side.
I think it's 100, is it 80 to 200, according to Colin Powell, in Israel.
Well, there you go.
Damn.
But officially,
again, there's the fortress. There's
That's more nuclear.
There's unofficially 80 to 200, but officially there's 0.
Yeah.
Officially there's 0, yeah. Only Russia and the United States have nuclear weapons.
Well, if Israel has 200 weapons, that's more than France. That's getting pretty close to the United Kingdom.
And think about how much money is given from the United States to Israel.
All of it.
So it was a $10 million. Well, yeah, all of it. Might as well be all of it.
I bet the Israeli nuclear program was 90% funded by the U.S. taxpayer.
I bet. And there's the whole propaganda thing. It's a very, even if the average American citizen opens their mouth about Israel and Palestine and tries to go to the right side, and I mean the just side, the correct side, they're most likely going to go, well, I don't know enough about it. Both sides are doing harm to each other, kind of like Trump with the whole white supremacists and Antifa in Charlottesville. Because the label, Hamas is a terrorist group, so, they represent Palestine. I don't know anything about Hamas, but the news keeps telling me they're a terrorist group. And you see the same things. You talk about colonies, you talk about colonization. You see the same things all over the world. When people talk about, again, any other genocide other than the Holocaust, especially when you're talking about colored people, they say conflict. When I read about Israel and Palestine, I see the word conflict all over the place in news articles. It's like, conflict? I've never heard the Aryans and the Jewish folks in the 30s and 40s in Germany talked about the conflict. When I hear about what the native people have gone through in North America and South America, the word conflict's thrown around again. Wars, the French and Indian wars. You're slaughtering native people every 5 seconds. This is straight out genocide. Black people, white people in the United States. Oh, these race riots, these race wars. You religion us. Ain't no race riot. There's no race war. You're killing us for the color of our skin. Israel and Palestine. Israelis are oppressing Palestinians because they're Palestinian, because they're Arab, because they want their land. This society overcomplicates things to distract that average person into, Israel, let's just let them do what they want, and we pay money to them. Who cares? But it's fine,
$3.8 billion a year or something like that we're giving them since they signed that last deal. Imagine all the things that could get done over here with $3.8 billion a year. Tangent City. You're right, Glenn.
You could buy the Washington football franchise 3 times and destroy it 3 times.
Wouldn't
kill
that
the
be a
mascot.
glorious day?
Or you could just end homelessness. But anyway, we're on a tangent. Not really. The 38.
We kept it to the topic. We kept it to the topic because at the end of the day, we're talking about the same thing. We want the same thing. We want Palestine to be free. We want Palestinians to be free. And
That's anti-Semitic talk there. No.
There you go. We're sticking right on topic.
Yeah. So Jen, I think we should move on because we're just kind of like, we're gonna run out of time. So you're here to give us updates on the NCAI conference. Was I correct?
That's not quite right. You got at least two of the letters right. So it's the National Congress of the American Indians. They are our largest and oldest nonprofit organization that supposedly works for the rights and betterment of Indigenous people. Well, not Indigenous people per se, but those who would be called American Indians or Alaskan Natives. So that's what they do. And so every February, the week of Valentine's in DC, they have what they call the Executive Council Winter Session. And so tribal government leaders, heads of Native 501c3s and stuff descend upon DC to meet with one another, talk, share updates on what's happening. And they also do visits to the Hill and nation-to-nation consultations with the U.S. government. Because, and I'm going to remind this to any listeners, Native people are not a race of people per se, but we are members or citizens of distinct sovereign nations. And as such, our nations are supposed to have a nation-to-nation relationship with the United States government. So, yes, I was at part of the Executive Council Winter Session this week. Got all kinds of updates for you all, and yeah. And then I'm going to get into the nonsense that happened this week at the council as well, because there was plenty of that. Hello.
Hello.
My God, I don't think I've ever heard y'all quiet. I always feel like I'm like trying to politely butt in and talk.
No, this is of all the times the butt in. Please not take over the show.
Well, no, I thought she was going to
occupy the show.
Yes, I get to occupy the airwaves for a little bit. Take it back from my people.
You said I have updates, and I was waiting for the updates.
So there's all kinds of things happening in what we call Indian country, which is that generally refers to the lands that we still have that are recognized as tribal lands. But what happens in the United States impacts all natives, and 71% of natives actually live in urban areas. So it's kind of a mix on some of the policy I'm going to talk about, and I think I'm probably make sense to start with the issue of violence against Indigenous women. Just to throw some statistics out there real quick for listeners who maybe aren't familiar. There was a study done by it was done under the DOJ, I should say. And in it, they found that 84.3% of Native women have been abused in their lifetimes. More than 1 in 2 of us have been raped. The vast majority, we're talking like 90% of the men who rape us are not Native. They're non-Native, and the vast majority of those men are white men. And that's actually the complete opposite of what it is for most rape survivors in the United States. We're sort of an anomaly in this. And when we talk about violence against Indigenous women, there's generally a large focus on the women who are out on the reservations. But it is a problem for urban communities as well. And so the thing with being on the tribally recognized lands that gets kind of tricky is that the U.S. government, they like to call us sovereign nations when it comes time for roads to be built, infrastructure made, funding our schools, things like that. But then when it comes time for us to make decisions for ourselves, for self-determination, to try non-natives who come on our lands and commit crimes, then we're not sovereign nations. So it's a very back and forth, messed up relationship that we have. And so what happens on a lot of these tribal lands is that the nations themselves, and this is one of the many reasons why I talk so much about the importance of sovereignty, is that if you are non-native, you can come onto our lands and do just about any damn thing you want, and you're going to get away with it. Anything from stealing a candy bar to kidnapping, raping, and murdering an Indigenous woman. You're going to get away with it because our tribal governments do not have jurisdiction. We're not allowed to go in and arrest you. We're not allowed to try you, to sentence you. We can't do that. The U.S. government has effectively tied our hands on all of that. But then the U.S. government won't come in and do their damn job. And it's to further complicate that, who has jurisdiction in terms of U.S. law enforcement varies a great deal from tribal nation to tribal nation. So depending on what your reservation is or your tribal village is, like, you may be what's considered a public law 280 state, which means that you then have to call in the local law enforcement. You got to call in the sheriff's office. And if you're not a 280 state, then you got to call in FBI. And the vast majority of times, like, these law enforcement agents don't come. It's a big freaking mess. And so we have this crisis of murdered and missing Indigenous women, but we also have a crisis of our children going missing. Even our boys and men are going missing, and especially our two-spirits as well. And a lot of this policy is very, it's needed, but in my opinion, it's not complete. It's not looking at the issues of violence against urban Native women and children, and it doesn't address two-spirit people. But some of the policy we have coming up right now is the reauthorization of VAWA, which is the Violence Against Women Act. VAWA, when it was originally started back in the 90s, I believe, it was mostly white women working on it. And with each reauthorization, it gets a little better and a little more diverse in terms of who's working on it and what kind of policy changes are being pushed for. And so for this VAWA reauthorization, which it was actually up in September, and because of the government, it didn't get a full reauthorization. It just got a reauth, which expired today. But so some of the things that our tribal leaders are looking for this reauth is that we're trying to get protections put in for our children as well as tribal law enforcement. Right now, it's been found that about 60% of non-Native perpetrated domestic violence cases include Native youth, but yet tribes can't prosecute. If you're a non-Native and you assault a Native child, you get away with it. Our tribal government can't do anything about it, and the U.S. government doesn't do anything. So that's one area where they're going to try to strengthen the rights for our Native people. And then with the law enforcement, I mean, we do know that while, I'm not a big fan of cops, but the reality is that domestic violence calls are generally pretty dangerous all around, including for law enforcement. And when our tribal law enforcement gets assaulted in that line of duty, there's no recourse for them because, once again, the tribal government can't do anything about it. So these are two things that I think are going to we're really going to see a lot of pushing for in this VAWA reauthorization. And then money, something that I consistently
Can I ask a
heard
question?
from the Violence Against Women Indigenous Task Force, which is under NCAI. There was a lot of talk about how there's just not enough money for law enforcement, and then also the jurisdictional issues, which I started off talking about a little bit. And so that's where we then have the Survive Act, which, if my memory is correct, that passed the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs on January 29th. So now it's eventually going to go and be voted on. And under the Survive Act, there's a 5% tribal set aside from the DOJ. And so what that means is that the DOJ puts money aside for, services, financial services type things for victims of crime and things of that nature. And so the DOJ would put 5% of those funds aside for tribal governments, which is nowhere near enough money, but it's more than what we're getting now. And then something that did get brought up by the Violence Against Women Task Force was that they might amend the Survive Act just to add some money in there for victim compensation, because there is no victim compensation right now for Native DV or rape survivors on tribal lands. And that's huge. We know sexual assault is the most expensive crime to the victim, and I myself, I have talked about it. I'm a survivor. I've, you get medical bills, long years worth of mental health care bills. You lose wages. If you are an Indigenous person who's murdered, then your family has to come up with the money for a funeral and burial services. There's a lot there that, you need victim compensation for. If you have to move suddenly, or you have to go spend a few nights at a hotel or something to be safe. And so that's something that it looks like might be amended onto the Survive Act to try to help some of our survivors more. God, there's just so much from this week.
Can I ask a question?
And I never know what to say. I hate to do a data dump, but I'm like a giant research nerd, so I always have so much data on me. There is an interesting Supreme Court case that we're waiting on a response from. I'm not an attorney. I'm more of a policy person, but I do want to mention this case because it's really important. It's Carpenter v. Murphy. And so this is one of those cases where it's an issue of just tribal sovereignty. Anytime you hear non-natives, particularly white people, saying that they want to do something that, like ICWA is one. That's the Indian Child Welfare Act. The Goldwater Institute is saying, oh, ICWA is racist. It's horrible for Native children. The Goldwater Institute doesn't give a damn about natives and Native children. They want to undermine tribal sovereignty. If you can do that, then it makes it easier and easier to go in and take our lands and to do all kinds of things. And so Carpenter v. Murphy is an issue of tribal sovereignty. So what this is the state of Oklahoma asked the Supreme Court to declare the Muskogee Creek Nation's reservation as disestablished, and then that it would no longer exist. The thing with that, though, is that their reservation was created in a treaty in 1866. The U.S. government signed it. And things of this nature are only in the hands of Congress. A state government doesn't have the right to decide what happens with tribal lands. This is a congressional issue. So this has made its way up to the Supreme Court. We're waiting on the decision for it. But what this particular case could mean for protecting our women and children and just our people is that the VAWA reauthorizations, what I was talking about, those only count on what's considered Indian country land, which means reservations, allotment land, tribal villages. So if the Muskogee Creek Nation, if their reservation is disestablished, then any of the protections that their women need, their children need, they aren't going to be there. So anything our people are working on right now to try to get pushed through Congress wouldn't benefit them if the Supreme Court comes back and says, yeah, we side with the state of Oklahoma. So those are the big things. Savannah's Act, we're also still trying to get Savannah's Act passed. And it looks like there might be an attempt to put some protections in there for urban Native women. The Urban Indian Health Institute put out 2 studies last year that were both really striking, very terrifying, looking at rates of violence against urban Native women. Excuse me. So one of them It's the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And they found that not only is it almost impossible to get accurate data, like they just read the report. It's like maybe 10 pages, 15 pages. Just read it. But basically, like urban Native women are being assaulted at horrific rates. One of their 2 reports was looking at sexual violence against Native women in Seattle, and it found that 94% of them had been raped or coerced into sex at least once in their lifetimes. So I am really hoping that in Savannah's Act we get some protections in there, not just for like our women on the res, but also for our women in the cities, because we really need that. So I think those are like the big things in terms of violence against Indigenous women and girls. As a Two-Spirit person, I have to always say that Two-Spirits are often not being recognized, not being counted, but we are still being raped and murdered and kidnapped and trafficked. So that is an issue where we as Native people still have a lot of work to do. So I think I'll go next, unless anybody has questions or anything.
I think Tim had one.
Yes, go for it.
It's from a long time ago, but I was wondering if when you said you guys were trying to get more policing on or better policing on the reservations, are those police people that live there with the people, or are they just police? I mean, like, do they have their own police consisting of Native people that understand things and can investigate and do stuff, or is it just a police force that's on a reservation?
So it's kind of tricky. So there's tribal police. All right, here's my understanding. So there's tribal police and there's BIA, which is Bureau of Indian Affairs police. Most of them are Native, but, kind of like how we were discussing earlier with, more diversity and representation in Congress, just because those may be your people doesn't mean that they're going to do right by you.
Yeah.
So, especially when you're getting funds from the U.S. federal government.
Okay.
But,
yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering because I was hoping that they were just people that lived on the reservation. That I don't know, like you know what I mean? Not like fascist sellouts.
I mean, it's not like LAPD, NYPD. It's not like that. They are generally Native. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily abiding by, their nation's cultural standards and such. But the other important thing about that, though, is that even when you have Indigenous people and nations who want to use their traditional forms of justice, they can't, because the U.S. government has tied our hands on that. So a lot of forms of, the traditional forms of justice that you might see happening, pre-white invasion, a lot of our nations can't do because the U.S. government won't let us. So it's kind of a mixed bag. It's like we need somebody out there to help stop this crime. We need somebody out there to help us find our people when they go missing, to help us recover bodies when they're found murdered. And a lot of that falls on law enforcement. But I also personally believe that we need our traditional forms of justice, and we need the space to do that and to find our own ways to heal that are outside of, the colonizers' idea of justice.
Yeah.
So does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So let's see here. I think one of the other things that I think was really striking is that the Winter Council, it's very, it's bipartisan. It's a nation-to-nation state situation. So you have Republicans, Democrats, all kinds of people from both sides of the aisle that come together to, meet and talk and such. And the week really kind of starts off with the State of Indian Nations address that President Keel, he's the president of NCAI, gives. And so after his State of the Indian Nations, Congresswoman Highland gave her sort of rebuttal to it. And in it, one of the things that really struck out to me was that she made this comment about how Native people are basically living under modern digital reservations. And she said this, what she meant by that, being, these modern digital reservations, is the extreme lack of broadband that we have in our rural areas, and how that, further disenfranchises Native people. So she said that only 10% of Indian country had broadband. And I personally knew it was bad, but I didn't realize it was that bad. So, you can have an entire area where no one could have internet. It doesn't even matter if the people there have the money for computers and internet service and such. It's just not even an option. And when you don't have that and you live in a rural area, that keeps people from being able to do all kinds of things. Find jobs, go to school online, like all kinds of stuff. Just communicating with the outside world about what's happening in your community, being able to advocate and fight for yourself and your people. Like, how do you do that in this age of constant, social media and internet access if you don't even have that? And I thought that was really important. And I feel like it really ties well into the upcoming issue of the 2020 census, which is a shit show. Not the words anyone at NCAI used, but that's what it is. It's a disaster. So we know with the census that Native people have been historically undercounted. And as a result of that, we don't get the funds that we should. We don't get the money we should get for a lot of reasons. But the census, not only does it, help with drawing district lines, deciding how many representatives you get and such, but it also is used as a tool to decide what communities get what kind of money. And Natives have been historically undercounted. This is, I consider it a form of paper genocide. Like, maybe you're not outright killing us, but you're saying that we don't exist. And the 2020 census, from everything I am seeing in my research, is going to be a colossal failure. I think it will be for most marginalized communities, but for what I'm seeing for Native people, I think it's just going to be a disaster. There hasn't been enough money given to the census. Dee Alexander from the Census Bureau was there giving us updates. And she said that there's just so many census jobs that should be filled by Native people for the Native count that are just empty. Just so many jobs empty right now. There were at least 2 kind of pilot project studies that were going to be done in Indian country that they didn't have the money, so they couldn't do it. And these pilot programs, these studies that they do, they're really important for deciding what kind of questions to ask and how to ask the questions. So those things are really helping the Census Bureau decide what the final, census, form is going to look like. And there's a lot of push this year to do a digital census. And so going back to what Congresswoman Holland said, if only 10% of Indian country has broadband, how the hell are we going to fill out a digital census? And even a phone version, even a phone version of it is difficult if you have older phones. If you have older phones, they may not be compatible with what the Census Bureau puts out. And it also creates like another privacy issue. It makes it easier to hack that information. And Native people are poor. We are poor. We are disproportionately poor. So all of this like digital campaign that the Census Bureau is doing it's not going to work for us. It's just not. And I don't know. It's a giant mess. And yeah, I don't know what to think about it. Yeah.
That's a messed up situation.
Yeah, it's a mess. Like I started back in the summertime, this last summer, I started doing some research. I was just going to write one article about the 2020 census, and as I started researching, I just dug deeper and deeper, and now this is going to be a series of articles about natives in the census historically up into the 2020 census. And it's just absurd what I found, like the undercounting, the inaccurate counts, it's a big mess. And one of the things I found a little disturbing at the executive council was that when Dee Alexander was talking, she mentioned how, this data is all private, no one can see it, no one should be concerned. But there was a report put out by the Leadership Conference Education Fund, and it actually talked about how the census may not be totally secure. And so I'm just going to try to paraphrase this whole thing here. So it says that to comply with provisions with the Federal Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2015, the Census Bureau is mandated to utilize Homeland Security's cybersecurity systems. And then the issue with that is that because not all federal personnel are sworn under confidentiality provisions of the Census Act, it is possible that employees of Homeland Security could see this information if they detect like a possible or real cyber attack. So it's, the census data is not entirely private, and the Census Bureau is not being honest about that. And that's really troubling for me. I mean, that's really troubling for me as a Native, thinking about how we are so rightfully distrustful of the U.S. government. And then here's this little caveat that could hurt our privacy, and the Census Bureau is not being honest about it. I asked how the shutdown had impacted the upcoming census, and the response I got was, it didn't impact it. Our people were still there working. I was just like, come the fuck on. Really? How could the shutdown not have impacted the census? I mean, it impacted everything.
I'll just jump in and say that this analytical suppression that you're speaking about at a federal level, that's been going on in Canada for decades as well. This is a standard strategy for assimilation. As long as the numbers keep coming out that Indigenous are disappearing, then we can ignore it even more, and it's just, it's a circle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you can't literally kill us all off, then you kill us all off culturally. You kill us off by saying that we don't exist. And if you don't have that data, then it is really easy to say we don't exist. And that goes back to the issue of like the missing and murdered and violence against Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirits. We're not being counted properly. The Urban Indian Health Institute's report found that law enforcement systems, if the police officers, the arresting officers, don't put in a race, those systems default to white.
Of course they do.
Yeah, and I was horrified. I mean, everybody should be horrified by that. So, like, it's like not only this is clearly it's an Indigenous issue, but this is an issue for everybody. If we're not counting who victims of violence are, and we're not doing it accurately, then we can't help solve the problems that's causing it. We can't be there to help support survivors and their family members and communities and loved ones. And yeah, it's all comes down to a form of genocide. Like if you say you're not real, you say you don't exist, it just makes it easier for the colonizer to come in and take your shit. And to kind of do it in a way that absolves them.
And the blatant lie of it is, especially in Canada, the highest birth rate by I don't know what the right word is, by group, by identifiable group. The highest birth rate in Canada for the last 30 years has been Indigenous. But yet the funding never goes up. If anything, it stays where it is, which is a decrease in real money.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Yeah. There's actually, the life of me, I can't remember it, but I do remember reading something about the Canadian census and all of this research I was doing. And I'm going to have to look it up. And one of our calls in the future, I'll have to bring it up and talk about it. So there were so many things that happened this week. I feel like I need the whole 2 hours to just prattle on about everything. One of the things that was brought up that's really important is that Indian Health Services, which is our treaty guaranteed health care. If you are a member or a citizen of a federally or state recognized tribe, you have a treaty right to health care funded by the United States government. Well, they don't fund it properly. It's the worst health care you can get in the United States, like way worse than anything else that exists. And one of the things that was brought up is that we have not had a permanent director of IHS for 5 years.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah, 5 years. So that's not, you can't just blame this on Trump. This was an Obama issue too. 5 years, we have not had a consistent director for IHS. And you have there are so many natives that are dying. We are such a young people. 42% of native people in the United States are age 24 or younger. And we are such a young people because we die so damn young. Murder. Yeah, murder is the third leading cause of death for Native women. So.
Wow.
But, yeah.
You know what I'm seeing, though, while you're laying all this out?
Uh-huh.
Everything kind of works together to the detriment of Native people. Like, it's all this stuff is intertwined in so many ways. It's horrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where, I made this decision that I'm going to, do this media coverage, and I'm going to do it to primarily non-Native audiences. I feel like non-Native folks need to know this. They need to recognize it, and they play a role in it, whether they know they do or not. But it's so complicated. How do you teach people about the issues you're facing when they don't even know you're real, when they don't even know you exist? And it's all so interwoven. It's like a case related to the Muskogee Creek possibly losing their reservation has this huge impact on the safety of Native women. The average person would never think that. Yeah, it's all tied together. And it's just so complicated and sometimes incredibly depressing. But I think the things I really want to try to end with, there were some good things that have come out of this week in terms of climate change. So I'm going to go into climate change. So these two little updates, they weren't part of NCAI, but the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania came out, I think it was last week, with a ban on Energy Transfer Partners. ETP is the company behind Dakota Access Pipeline, Bayou Bridge, Trans-Pecos, Mariner East, and ETP has the worst safety record in the industry. They have, and that's saying something. It's already an unsafe industry, and they are the worst of the worst. And it's been so bad in Pennsylvania that the Commonwealth, like Democrat or Republican, almost every politician up there is in the pocket of oil and gas. But yeah, it just got so bad. Pennsylvania was like, yeah, you can't do construction here anymore. So ETP can't do any new construction right now in Pennsylvania, which is great because the Marcellus and Utica Shale, those are there. And those are like two really big deposits of gas. So that's huge. That's a good win for us on climate change. And then ETP also had their RICO suit against Greenpeace, Bank Track. There was a couple of individual activists. I feel like there may have been one other entity. But anyway, ETP brought a RICO suit against them for, I believe it was $900 million, and that was dismissed this week. So
That's good news too.
Yeah, there's some good news on climate change front. And now I'm gonna get into the dirt. I'm gonna get down in the muck and throw the dirt around of what happened this week and what I've been kind of frustrated with. So NCAI President Keel said in the State of Indian Nations address, and I quote, "Human beings are the cause and we must be the solution." He said that in reference to climate change. Well, that was on Monday. On Tuesday, President Keel and one of their vice presidents, I can't recall his name, got up on a stage and accepted a check for $500,000 from Wells Fargo.
What?
Yup. $500,000 from Wells Fargo. Yeah. So Wells Fargo, for folks who aren't super familiar, they funded DAPL. They're still funding Keystone XL. They fund ICE detention centers, private prisons. There's the mortgage crisis where they hurt Black folks. Like, Wells Fargo is evil. They're just so evil. And
you left one out.
What did I miss?
They gave $8,300 to new Congresswoman Cerise Davids.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. They've, Yep, they have. I forgot about that. But they're just evil. And so a lot of natives have been protesting Wells Fargo. I have protested Wells Fargo. I've walked down in the middle of a street in DC in front of the Wells Fargo Pride Parade float. Like, a lot of us in Indian country and urban natives are just like, fuck Wells Fargo. So Wells Fargo launched this $50 million initiative to basically buy us all off. That's essentially what it is. They're trying to show, oh, we like Indians so much, here's some money, while we come in and, rape your lands and you as people. But yeah, NCAI took that money and they did it. And it's not even just that they took the money, it's that they did it in such a sleazy way. So they didn't announce what was going to happen. So on the agenda for the week, it just said special presentation. So if you weren't sitting in that room, you had no idea what happened. And I've been doing some looking. I haven't looked since like yesterday, but I haven't found any press releases either from NCAI about this donation. I haven't seen any social media posts, nothing. So it's like they took it, but they kind of kept it really hush-hush so that Native folks wouldn't know and be angry at them and hold them accountable. It was like, there's not been many moments in my life where I've been ashamed to be Native, but that was one of them. I was just dumbfounded and disgusted by that.
Well, this is sounding like one of the Assembly of First Nation annual congresses in Canada now, once I hear this. Oh, yeah.
It's there were so many things that happened this week, and I feel like I've monopolized so much time, and we only have a half an hour left. But, along with this nonsense with the Wells Fargo, and the representative from Wells Fargo, when she's on the stage and she was talking, she also said this won't be the last, meaning this won't be the last time they give NCAI money. And I did try to get an interview on the record with Wells Fargo. Of course, they wouldn't give me one, but I at least gave it a shot. But then it was that day, I was trying to get into a session on ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act, which my nation, Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, is involved in a lawsuit with that. And I was told that because I'm not a paying member, I'm not allowed to go in. And that's a really important point, going back to the issues of poverty. How can you expect a very poor group of people to be a paying member of your organization? And wow, what a way to gatekeep who gets to make decisions on what happens with Native people. And the very next day, after this. Can't recall if it's president or chairman, which title it is, but it's Julian Bear Runner. He is the second youngest, I believe it's president, of the Oglala Sioux Nation. And he got up at the council during one of the tribal consultation sessions with the White House and said that, the Pine Ridge Reservation has a 90% poverty rate. It's not right that they have to pay to be a part of this organization and to be heard. And he at one point said something along the lines of, I don't even see the point in being here. And President Keel said, well, if you feel that way, maybe you should just leave. So this week was really, it was really sad. It was very frustrating in terms of NCAI and watching how they're behaving and how they're treating natives and, just gatekeeping all of this stuff. It's frustrating. And one of my most favorite people in the entire world, Joy Braun, we were talking about the things that happened this week. And she said this to me and she gave me permission to share this, but we were talking about the leadership. The vast majority of the leadership in NCAI are older people. They're elders. There's almost no youth. I believe their board of directors, there's maybe 3 women. So it's also not only is it mostly older people, but it's also primarily cis-het men. There is zero LGBTQIA two-spirit representation. It doesn't exist. Disabled natives have no voice and no seat at the table either. And the leaders who are there, it's mostly people from tribal nations that have some money from oil or casinos. So it's not even like tribal nations from across the United States. It's the most privileged. And so when Joy and I were talking about this whole week and everything that happened, and she said NCAI needs to make a choice. Are they an Indigenous-led organization or an organization being led by the nose ring of the colonizer? And that was just that was perfect. That was spot on. Yeah.
Well, I think in Canada, people like Pam Palmater and maybe Russ Diabo would say the exact same thing about the relationship up here between the Crown and the Assembly of First Nations.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've been reading this book, Like a Hurricane. It's about the history of AIM, just the American Indian Movement. And in it, NCAI gets mentioned, and the way they talk about it, I can't recall exactly what words they use, but they basically painted it as AIM were the natives who were actually fighting for natives, and NCAI was just establishment Indians who are assimilated and just trying to stay assimilated and get white man power. Yeah.
Pretty accurate.
Yeah, so they're all my ramblings of what happened this week, the good and the bad.
What's the old phrase? The good, bad, and the ugly.
Yes, the ugly, the Wells Fargo donation. And you know what killed me is that, $500,000 is a lot of money for natives, but for an organization like Wells Fargo, $500,000 is chump change. You didn't just sell out your people and sell out the earth and all living beings, but you sold them out for almost nothing. It just...
Yeah, that's not even what they get in fees from their customers in 1 year.
Yeah. I was
nothing.
just you sold us all out for practically nothing.
And the best part is, I bet they get to write it off, too.
Oh, yeah, because, and that's the other thing. I couldn't get, an on-record interview. So the Wells Fargo rep, we did sit down and talk, and she gave me information about their $50 million initiative. And the money is for Indigenous 501c3s only. So then it's a tax write-off for them, And it's
also closed door directional advice as well.
Yep. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've seen the same thing from my folks. For example, I remember during the 2016 election, I believe it was the national. It may have been a national conference for the NAACP. I know it was at least an NAACP event, and they invited Hillary Clinton to speak, and she spoke. And you see that as as an oppressed person within that group, and you go, what are we doing? What the hell? We're shooting ourselves with their ammunition. What are we doing? We're supposed to be decolonizing. We're helping them colonize us.
Yeah.
Yeah, Clinton
Yeah.
thought it was the NAASP. That's for super predators at the end.
God.
National American Organization Advancement of Super Predators.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, but she gets to go and speak. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's just all kinds of U.S. politicians coming through the door and such. And, by the end of Tuesday, after I had been physically pushed out of one space by an NCAI staffer, and then I had another NCAI person, Robert, God, what was his name? I can't remember at the top of my head. It was Robert Holden, I believe was his name. That's the guy who basically said, you're not going in the ICWA session. That's the end of it. After that, I was just like, okay, there's no point in me coming on Wednesday or Thursday. They were very sort of secretive as well with press. Almost all these sessions weren't listed as not allowing press in. And then you get there and suddenly press weren't allowed in. So it was very strange. Things that I feel like press should have been allowed in, they weren't allowing us in. And even for me as a community member, when I went to Robert and asked him, I could have just taken my press pass off and gone into the ICWA session, but I didn't feel right about that. And so I went to him, and I wasn't trying to be argumentative or difficult. I was just asking, what are your protocols for allowing Native people who are also press into these press-free spaces? Because as an organizer, I completely understand the importance of having spaces where we don't have press, but I am still Native. I'm Sloggy. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. I have every right to be in every freaking meeting at a conference. There's no reason for me to not be allowed in.
You know how I deal with that?
How?
I'll ask people, if it's something more private, I'll ask people if they mind if I film or not. And some people say yes or no. And, sometimes they're cool. Like the people that don't want to be filmed will go to one side and the other people will be somewhere else, and this kind of works out. Other times, I'll just keep the lens cap on or something to accommodate what they want. But if you're in public, that's a whole nother story.
Oh, yeah. These were not private meetings. These are open. And I even said to Robert when I was speaking to him, I was like, listen, I get press is not allowed in. And, and I was like, but I'm Native and I would really like to be in this. And he just continued to say no. And I said, look, I will not share a single thing that I learned in this space. I was like, I will not go in as press. I will be going in as Jen Deerenwater, citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. I'm there to listen. My nation is involved in the ICWA suit. I want to be there. I have Native women friends who have had their children taken from them by the United States and Canadian government. I want to be there. And then his response changed from no press to, well, you didn't have to pay to be here today, so it's not fair for you to be allowed in.
Pay to be here.
Yeah. Yeah. So apparently to NCAI, the only natives that matter are natives that can give them money. Yeah. That was my takeaway from the week, is that, fuck the environment, fuck all our people and all the horrible things that have been done to us as we're fighting DAPL and all these various pipeline projects. To hell with it. Only thing that matters is money. That was really my takeaway from the week. And it's been really depressing. And like, Nolan and I, we've had conversations on the side about this. So it's like, I feel ashamed to be Native this week. I feel really ashamed watching what NCAI did. Like, by no means do I think my people are perfect, but goddamn, I didn't realize we were that bad, I guess.
Well, this is an organization within a group. It's not, they don't speak for all Native people, do they? I mean,
oh no,
not even officially.
No one officially speaks for all Native people, but they are our oldest and largest Native organization, and they do have sway. They have quite a bit of power. So that's what's also depressing. Like, there are plenty of like grassroots organizations out there. There are smaller nonprofits that are working on, maybe one or two issues, or they're working on the issues of a specific Indigenous nation or area of land or something. But NCAI is like the big one. They're the big folks, which I guess, shouldn't be surprised they're, corrupt.
They're your NAACP.
Yeah.
Well, I'm saying the bigger
fair comparison.
I think any organization, no matter what it's for, the bigger it gets, the more outside influences it would have. Because, you have more people coming from different agendas mixing in, and like you said, money talks to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but yeah, it's screwed up.
Yeah, it was a mess. But I was there. I participated, I talked, I asked questions, I did what I felt like my responsibility is as a Native person. And in the end, I also had a really horrible pain spike this week. Like, it was bad. I could barely move. Like, I was sobbing off and on. The pain was so bad. And I still was like, I'm going to push through. I'm going to go do this work. Like, I owe it to my people. And by that end of Tuesday, after being told that I didn't have a right to go listen into the ICWA session, that's when I was just like, all right, fuck it. I've done all I can do here. And I just left. And yeah, I've felt kind of like deflated, but as I've talked with like other Natives that I'm friends with and, trust, it seems that a lot of Natives are not happy with NCAI. So, yeah.
Jen, I'm curious, did they have press liaison?
So when I signed up for my press pass, there is like a press liaison type email for it. And, there's press check-ins and stuff, but I never actually met anyone who was specifically like there to deal with media per se. And they didn't do the best job in showing the areas where press were not allowed in. Like the space that I was physically pushed out of, there were no signs anywhere saying that press weren't allowed. If there'd been signs that saying press weren't allowed, I would have respected that and not gone in. But there weren't any signs. There was no announcement saying, hey, press can't go into this area. So yeah, they got to do a lot of work on that. And I even said, after I got pushed out of that space, I went and spoke with someone and said, hey, listen, I wouldn't have gone back there if I had known, but you didn't make announcements and there's no signs saying that press aren't allowed. And they never put any signs up. So I don't know if it was incompetence, if it was just some things fell through, or if it was just purposeful, like them trying to make it look like press is welcome, but really on the back end, we really weren't welcome. So I feel like it's a little bit of all of those, especially given that they took that Wells Fargo check and only had it listed as a special presentation on their agenda.
Yeah.
Well, from my experience, you can never put it past the operations team of events like this to have very, very short checklists before. They're just not going to cut anybody any slack. I mean, I've been to political party conventions as a delegate, and as press. There's a difference, but everything's also very clear. And then what sounds like pretty much the polar opposite of the conference you went to, I went to RightsCon last year, which happened to be in Toronto, and we're talking 3 days, almost 200 sessions. Not one of them was closed to the press.
Wow.
It was very clear that there were two colors of neckbands for your ID. Green meant you were okay with being quoted, recorded, or had your picture taken. If somebody had a red lanyard, that meant no. And that worked so easy. It was amazing.
Yeah.
I just figured, wow, this is so simple. How come people don't do this everywhere?
Yeah, that would be incredible to do.
But they're not interested in it. That's the difference.
Yeah, that's it. They don't really want it to be a welcoming open space. They don't want transparency. They want to be able to do whatever the hell they do and get away with it without, any form of being held accountable. And I'd said that I told myself after this year, I'm not going to bother trying to go next year. I'm not going to bother going to press. Honestly, I probably wouldn't be welcome anyway after talking about this all here today. I would be stupefied if they gave me a press pass for next year. Like, I almost want to try just to see if I could slip through the cracks. But yeah, it's like, and that was the other thing. I didn't even really see a lot of press there. Even at the State of the Indian Nations, I didn't really see much press. There really weren't a lot of us.
Maybe that's another issue.
Yeah.
And it's a shame outlets like this are so corrupted. And I look at the NAACP. The NAACP accepted donations from Donald Sterling. This type of stuff is not abnormal, especially when the overseers, the colonizers, the government, the system, they try to quash any movement on the freedom fighting front. Mm-hmm. And you look at something like the NAACP founded by W.E.B. Du Bois, it's not what it used to be. Mm-mm. So a lot of these type of organizations get corrupted, and they become something like Congress. And I remember listening to people like Jen, Native people like Jen, and hearing that these tribal chairmen wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the white invasion, and of course the making of the reservations. So many of these things that we see on Native reservations, or hell, the quote unquote hoods in the black community, they wouldn't exist, let alone the reservations and quote unquote hoods themselves. Mm-hmm. I think that's one thing we forget as especially black and Native people. It's so difficult to survive when you don't want to compromise and assimilate and just say, okay, you know what, I'm okay with the white society. I'm okay with, Wells Fargo donating to this organization that I've respected for so long, or Donald Sterling donating to an organization I respected for so long. I mean, my dad, a former Panther, when I first got into activism, he was one of the first people I went to for obvious reasons. And I remember one of the first causes I took up, he told me to call the local NAACP. And all I got was an answering machine. I called over and over and over and over again. And I kept getting an answering machine. And this is what we're left with. I think the key is, and you sadly suffered this, Jen, this week, when you get knocked down by that assimilation by others of your group, of your oppressed group, you shake it off, get back up, and keep trying to educate and say the right thing. Don't pull a Miss Omar where you say the right thing and then you pull it back. Keep going forward. Don't go side to side. Don't go backwards. Keep going forward. Keep telling the truth. Keep telling the hard truths. One reason why we have made progress, still in hell, but made progress. We're not slaves on little plantations in the United States anymore. Native people aren't being slaughtered by the thousands every 5 seconds like they were before. Again, still in hell, but we've made some progress. Is because our ancestors kept moving forward despite all the pressure on them, even from their own people, to be like, "Yo, calm down. You're gonna get us in trouble." Like Malcolm said, the house Negro, the field Negro. It's tough to be the field Negro. It's very difficult.
Ask Steve Harvey.
Oh, he's in the house. He's got a nice bed. They make him breakfast every morning. Oh boy. But it's difficult to tell the truth and be honest, fight against this oppressive system and all these different avenues of propaganda that is forced upon us. And I look at our two people. I'll say this till I'm dead. We have to unite. Red and black has to unite. We can't go with the narrative that is pushed on us, even though it's very difficult, because a lot of times we don't know any better. Most children, I think I found this out when I was like 12, that Lincoln was an asshole who actually hated black people. But most black people grow up, Lincoln he freed us, he loved us. These are the types of things that we believe. So,
well, those are the narratives that we get.
Exactly.
Which there's a reason we don't get the actual truth. It's easier to get people to stay underfoot if they don't actually know what's really being done.
Yeah, and we have to keep our ears open when we hear the truth. When something comes out like the NFL protests, black folks, we can't just be about ourselves, because it's not just about ourselves. Obviously, yes, black people are being shot and killed by the police. Colin Kaepernick came out and kneeled, and he got blackballed. But at the same time, you've got two teams in that league that are complicit in Native genocide and adding to the Native genocide rate. We can't close our eyes to that. Someone like LeBron James can't close his eyes to that when he's in Cleveland, lives in Cleveland most of his life, and he wears a quote unquote Cleveland Indians jersey. When we see the truth, we cannot close our eyes. That's white folks' job. Let them do that. As a majority, white folks are not going to help us. We need to leave them alone. If an individual like Tim and Glenn comes on board and legitimately helps us like they do, then that's great. But on the overall, we need to do what we need to do, and we need to keep our eyes open, keep our ears open, and keep moving forward, not side to side or backwards.
Yep.
Wholeheartedly agree with everything you said. And I will also add that while I love being Native, like, we Natives, we got to do more to support black folks and other folks. Like, we got to, man, we just, we don't have much time left, but yeah, we got to take care of ourselves, but we got to do a better job of being there for other people too. And uniting. You're exactly right. I think part of why we've seen this huge, much more public resurgence of white supremacy since 2016 is because we got white people running scared. You've got black folks doing Black Lives Matters, like shutting down freeways. You've got Natives doing Standing Rock protests, the camps and things there. And so it's like, we've got them running scared. Now, if we could just all come together and find a way to work together, white people would be done.
It'd be over.
Done.
It'd be over. They spent $1 billion to break up the American Indian movement. They spent moon money, Apollo money, to break up the Black Panthers. and to break up the alliance between the two groups. I met a family, a daughter and a mother, whose father and husband, respectively, was killed on a native reservation because he was a black activist, in alliance with native folks, helping native folks. And from what I've been told, he was most likely killed by AIM members because they were told that he was an FBI informant.
Oh, yeah.
FBI.
Yeah.
So this is how deep this shit goes. You know,
yeah.
And again, we cannot close our eyes to that. We can't, and it's so difficult not to. It's so difficult not to do that. I mean, it's the FBI, all the cop shows, all the movies about the FBI, and the cops glorifying them, seeing black folks as FBI members. Oh, cool, a black cop. That's cool. No, that's not cool. That's not cool. We got to keep our eyes open to understand who's killing Walter Scott, who's killing Sandra Bland. It's not aliens. It's the police. So again, these are the types of things we need to keep our eyes and our ears open for. And it's difficult. It's very difficult. You will be more depressed, and that trauma, the intergenerational trauma that every black and native person has the moment they are born, gets exacerbated because you are feeling that trauma in space, seeing, oh wow, it is really that bad. There's all these different things in place to keep us down, but at the same time, if we fight and we say no, that's not okay, then we'll get that much closer to our freedom. Because again, we'd still be on plantations if we didn't fight back. If we did what white people wanted us to do, if we followed their rules, we still literally be calling them master.
There you go. On that note, we're gonna have to end. But thanks. I'm sorry, I was looking at the chat. Thanks to everybody for being here today. Thank you, Jen, for basically holding down the show for half of it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
No, I mean that's
you.
a good thing because it was informative and we learned a lot. And like I said, I see how that stuff is all connected. It's all connected. But we can talk about that another time.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add at the very end, Glenn?
Well, the way it sounded to me, it was like you got to take half the show off or something.
You know I love that, though, right?
I didn't see the producer in the background. Let y'all talk.
All right. So thank you, everybody, for listening. And thanks to all the hosts for today. And we'll see everybody next week.
Peace out.